Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for returning for another segment. We'll be speaking with Dr. Michael Jaff and also Dr. Peter Monteleone, both joining us here to discuss a new type of AI-powered data that looks to fill the gaps that are left by clinical trials. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Jaff and Dr. Monteleone. Dr. Jaff, if you would give our listeners a bit of insight into your professional background, and then Dr. Monteleone, if you would do the same.
My pleasure. I'm a vascular medicine specialist. I ran the vascular program at Mass General Hospital in Boston for many years, and I am now the Vice President and Chief Medical Officer for Peripheral Interventions at Boston Scientific. Peter?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. So my name is Peter Monteleone. I'm an interventional cardiologist and a vascular medicine doctor. I'm here in Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas Dell School of Medicine. I'm also the Director of Cardiovascular Research for Ascension Cardiovascular nationally.
You're the principal investigator of the REAL-PE study, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Well, let's talk about the study results and the potential for this real-world data to improve patient care in pulmonary embolism treatment and more.
Absolutely. Well, so the field of pulmonary embolism and advanced therapy for pulmonary embolism has just been growing exponentially. You know, for decades, care of these patients who can be critically ill has been somewhat limited. There's huge mortality and morbidity associated with pulmonary embolism, and it strikes all types of patients, from the young and very healthy to those with multiple different comorbidities and medical problems. Over the last years, truly over the last decade, we've had an explosive development of novel technologies and novel systems of care for patients with pulmonary embolism. And we've had a coincident birth and growth of clinical trial analysis, many of which is still ongoing right now to start answering some of the fundamental questions about PE care. But these techniques and these care delivery systems, they're in place already. And so REAL-PE developed as a mechanism of utilizing a novel data resource, the Truveta data resource, in order to give us some insight into how therapies were being delivered now and how the safety of some of these therapies was developing as these technologies were being implemented throughout the country.
Now, this data was presented at the TCT annual meeting.
That is exactly correct. So actually at the same time of the presentation, it was the formal manuscript was simultaneously made publicly available through the Journal of the Society of Coronary Angiography and Interventions. So we had the opportunity to present the data live, coincident with publication at TCT just in October of this year.
How do the results reflect an improvement in overall patient care for PE?
So one of the things that's most exciting about this is the fact that it let us look directly into the electronic health records of a huge percentage of the patients that are being treated. So the Truveta data resource, which we worked with here, Truveta looks at the healthcare and delivered to a large percentage of the American population. So this is a data system which has been utilized in other subsegments of medical care. You know, it's the Truveta system that's been utilized to monitor the safety of pediatric COVID vaccination, for instance. It's been utilized to look at novel pharmaceutical therapies in diabetes and Alzheimer's care. This was the first time we were really using it in order to look at cardiovascular device safety. Truveta in general, you know, looks at 30 different health systems. About 18% of all the healthcare delivery is captured within the system. And so what we did within this analysis is we looked at all the patients that were treated among an 83 million patient cohort, every single consecutive patient treated with interventional therapies utilizing either the ECOS device by Boston Scientific, performing ultrasound-assisted catheter-directed thrombolysis, or the Inari device that was utilized for performance of mechanical thrombectomy. And we looked at every consecutive patient treated with those devices. And we built out two cohorts. There was a total cohort that looked at every patient going all the way back to 2009 in that primary analysis. And then we looked at a more recent contemporary analysis, so the last 5 years of patients, 2018 to 2023. One of the things that's so exciting and powerful about this method of studying these patients is this included patients all the way up to May of 2023. So we had this analysis completed, paper published, presented live in October of 2023. And it included patients that had just been treated, 4 to 5 months before that. And so it speaks to real-time data availability to let us look at these patients. And we looked at a number of different outcomes, primarily driven by comparative safety of use of these two very different technologies, ECOS, ultrasound-assisted catheter-directed thrombolysis versus Inari mechanical thrombectomy. And we found a number of different things. So we saw the populations that were treated. We saw some variation actually in the patient populations. More Black patients were treated with EKOS than Inari. More Hispanic patients were treated with Inari versus EKOS. And we looked at the sum total of outcomes. We saw a dramatic increase in bleeding associated with utilization of the Inari device versus the EKOS device. We use the characteristic, the statistic, the number needed to harm, when we try to compare technologies and the safety of technologies. And when we looked at different types of outcomes. We looked at hemoglobin drops greater than 2, greater than 5. We looked at requirement for transfusions. We looked at coding of actual types of bleeding events. And we saw that number needed to harm was as low as 6. And so that meant that for certain types of bleeding outcomes, if you treated 6 patients, that small of a number with Inari versus EKOS, you would cause 1 bleed, which potentially could have been avoided by utilizing EKOS as the safer device in that therapy. So that was true across both cohorts. That was true across the multivariable regression that we performed. And we really saw kind of this dramatic safety signal across all these consecutive patients treated.
How did these results affect in-hospital mortality, readmission rates, length of hospital stays?
So in addition to that primary outcome of bleed, we looked at a number of other outcomes, including those that you just mentioned. And so what we saw as we looked at these kind of 2,000 patient cohort, a lot of patients, and again, every consecutive patient treated within an 83 million patient subset, we saw no statistically significant difference in in-hospital death, though there was a trend towards an improvement in in-hospital death utilizing the EKOS device. We saw no difference in 30-day readmission between the two cohorts, but again, we saw a trend, though not statistically significant, with improvement with EKOS. Importantly, there's been this kind of long-held discussion about whether thrombectomy might shorten length of stay, because it didn't require the infusion period that thrombolysis utilized. When we looked at that, though, within this real data, within REAL-P, we saw that there was no difference in that median length of stay either. So those outcomes were no different. Now, in addition to those outcomes and the major bleeding outcomes and the multivariable regression outcomes, we also looked at these different components of bleeding. One of the big questions that comes up with any bleeding analysis or any safety analysis in venous thromboembolism, including pulmonary embolism, is we worry about the risk of intracranial hemorrhage. Interestingly, we saw a statistically significant increase in intracranial hemorrhage associated with use of the Inari device as opposed to the EKOS ultrasound catheter direct thrombolysis device. That was a novel finding in this work, which we saw within this cohort. Now, those numbers were small on both sides of the analysis, demonstrating the safety in that field, but we're really seeing that signal for the first time.
Is there anything that you'd like to add? What's the major takeaway? And then give us a website where our listeners can learn more if there is one.
I think that what this does is several things. It allows the discussion among physicians to be done in a logical, sensible, data-driven way, suggesting that what we do for patients is customized to the patient. There's not just one therapy that works for every patient every time, and that's the case when you're treating someone's blood pressure, someone's diabetes, or someone's pulmonary embolus. And so I think what this data does is allow that discussion to go forward. Secondly, it fills a gap until large-scale randomized clinical trial data is reported. There are several large studies, including the preeminent high pathos study, that will shed a lot of scientific light onto the future treatment of patients with serious pulmonary embolus. But until that data is read out, which it could be 2 years from now, having this type of data allows physicians a confidence to understand how patients are being treated today and what safe therapy for pulmonary embolus can be. And as far as a website for this, you can find the article on the JSCAI website, Journal of Society of Cardiovascular Angiography and Interventions, and Boston Scientific's website also has information on this.
I thank both of you, Dr. Michael Jaff and Dr. Peter Monteleone. Thank you both for joining us here on Health Professional Radio, and I'm hoping that you return.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Michael Jaff and Dr. Peter Monteleone. Audio copies of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au, also at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.